Well, welcome everybody. So really what we're going to talk about, I think we're all familiar with how do we find talent, how to retain talent, how do we think differently about getting more diversity. That's something that's extremely important to me. I know many of you in the audience know who I am, but it's one of the things I've spent the last 18 years really trying to open up opportunities for women, people of color, and minorities. We need everybody, so it's really about making sure that we create teamwork and supporting one another, whether we work at the same company or not. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then we want to leave about 15 minutes at the end for any of you to ask us questions as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Katelynn, when you think about resources, what do you do to attract diverse talent and talent in general?
Yeah. Sorry, I've lost my voice. Is this working? Nope. Now is it working?
Yeah.
Yep. So, excuse my scratchy voice, but I lost my voice earlier today. So when I think about where do we find talent and how are we attracting diverse talent, we're really diversifying the avenues in which we actually look for talent. So whether that's geographical diversity, we are a fully remote workforce, and so for the most part, we do open it up generally to anywhere in the United States. I think that helps us in recruiting diverse workforce and talent. It also, as we think about looking at the job postings that we use and how do we do a skills-based approach to talent acquisition and retention, we're really looking for the skills rather than a very specific set of background requirements. You don't necessarily have to have a very specific education requirement or experience requirement. We're really looking to have that person demonstrate that they have the skill set that's needed, which opens up several doors. And then I would say we're also looking at just ways to partner with areas around the Columbus area and around in the community. So we partner with a high school and try to bring high schoolers in for internships and really build a diverse pipeline. And I think it really starts much younger than even high school in building a diverse pipeline, but that's kind of how we've approached across a few different target areas.
And then Brian, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think obviously there's some downsides of COVID, but I think one of the things we've seen the benefit of that is we're not constrained to the 270 loop here, right? I think that's historically where we had looked for talent. Post-COVID, we are 100% remote workforce as well, so that opened up many doors for us to go and look for new talent. One of the things that we've also done is invested. We have a captive center in India as well as the Philippines as well. So that's opened up for some talent there to put some roles in those locations as well. Some more technical than others, but we've found a really great wealth of talent in those locations that we've been able to add to our teams over the last couple of years as well.
And I think I just wanted to have you both add, because I know you're working with Southwestern City Schools, and then you and I and a lot of other people are working with Dublin City Schools. So one of the things we've been talking about is starting a program and having high school students become part of the Central Ohio ISSA, where they can come to our meetings for free. We can engage with them. We're looking at getting at least 50 high school and college students to the summit in April. Because we want to get that encouragement. We had 6 kids from Dublin City Schools. They're still talking about it from May, and they are super stoked. And can you imagine, by show of hands, if you were able to walk into the InfoSec Summit with 1,500 cybersecurity professionals and have that type of resource in front of you? I'm 53. That never happened when I started. But I mean, by a show of hands, how many people think that's going to make a big difference in building more diverse teams and getting more people interested? So I love it, almost 100%, so that's good. So next question is, one of the things you hear about all the time is, how are we developing talent? What investments are we making? Can you maybe talk a little bit, Brian? I know you guys have some programs, and then Katelynn, I'll have you wrap that up, on how do we put training and coaching and mentoring in place, because it's so crucial in today's world, and a lot of the new legislation is actually calling out training. So just want to talk a little bit about what you're doing at Cardinal and what's working.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly, technical training and investing in external training is a big part of what we do, and sending folks to events like this are a big part of it. But one of the things that we've also done over the last couple of years is build a digital university, and within that, we've got some information security colleges as well. So, we've created everything from kind of your information security essentials, so kind of just some basic stuff. We've created some different paths within security architecture and incident response, and then created some different levels in there, everything from a beginner to an advanced type of a role and curriculum within there. So we've been able to use that to develop some of our own internal talent and upskill them and prepare them, quite honestly, for new roles in information security. And we're just kind of getting started with that. So we've got a few folks that have made it through it and moved into roles, but I guess the early returns are pretty good from that perspective.
Yeah, I would just, I think to piggyback, we do a lot of internal training, providing each of our employees with sort of an allocation of training funds that they can use however they see fit in alignment with their manager to make sure that it's appropriate for the business, but definitely, encourage personal growth and continued education. But beyond that, we really create it as part of the culture. So one of the things that we do at Root is we have hack days, which are days set aside each quarter for individuals to really go expand their skills, use their time to practice new skills, work on something that they've a passion project, or really even mentoring and coaching other individuals on the team to get cross-functional groups engaged in a single effort. And I think that some of those areas that are a little bit less formal than maybe a training or a conference, but give people really hands-on experience and or the ability to learn and grow as they see fit, has really sort of been ingrained in the culture at Root. And I think that's an important component. It's not like once a quarter you get to go do this, but really this is something that we encourage on an ongoing basis. You really should be participating in these and looking for ways and opportunities to grow and build your skill set, and that we encourage that.
And then by a show of hands, has anyone ever heard of Tech Cred for the state of Ohio? So just something to think about. I know Brian and we've talked about it too. In Ohio, every other month, every company can get up to $25,000, $2,000 per. Is it 30 now? Or I think it's 25. But just so you know, so if you can take advantage of that 6 times a year times 25 grand, that's a lot of money. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. Basically you have to pay it up front, and then once you submit the paperwork, they reimburse companies. So with budgets being a little tighter, I think everyone's kind of struggling with that. Just know that the state of Ohio has some amazing programs that are based for people that live in Ohio. So the company doesn't have to be headquartered, but it's only for Ohio residents. So we can't utilize it for other states, but just things to keep in mind, because again, Brian, even and you guys, what you're doing internally, you might be able to partially fund some of that. So it's kind of nice to be able to leverage those dollars as well. And I do think before COVID, a lot of companies did shadow. That's the only thing I'm sad about the 100% remote is I know Huntington used to do a half day where people that are interested in cyber could spend a half day going with all the different, the SOC and other areas, just to get more people encouraged. Because it's funny to me, still in 2022, people still think cyber is the person pounding on a keyboard and doing pen testing. And we all know that's such a small part of cybersecurity. There's so much more. So it's definitely kind of interesting how those things are going. So the next question is, I know you both said you're 100% work from home. So do you think that's here to stay, or do you think companies will eventually go to more of a hybrid model?
To be honest, I would hope it would move more towards the hybrid model, but I think the toothpaste is kind of out of the tube at this point, right? I think we talked about what happened post-COVID and the fact that we're 100% remote. We've started hiring folks all over the world now, right? So to think that we're going to get to a full hybrid mode where we have people back in the office part-time, I think that's never going to happen, quite honestly. The one thing we do talk about at Cardinal is kind of those moments that matter, though, right? What are the times when we need to bring people together in the office to make a decision, vet out a process, deal with some kind of an incident or whatever it is, those are the times, quite frankly, when we need to be together, physically present. And that's kind of how we handle those types of things too. And then, certainly for those remote workers, we look for opportunities to get those leadership team members together, in the same location, just if nothing else for some team bonding and team building experiences and things like that, just so we can get to know each other a little bit better and build the trust that we need to operate effectively.
I would echo that. And really, I would just say that we have so many benefits from having a fully remote workforce that even from a company perspective, we don't want to give those up either, right? They allow us access to such a diverse pipeline and so much more talent, and allow, having individuals across time zones helps us from a security perspective as well. So there are a lot of benefits that I don't think we'll ever move back to a hybrid approach. We'll remain fully remote. And I think, to your point, like taking advantage of moments where you can get the whole team together and really use that time in a meaningful way to deliver value to the team that will encourage them and make them sort of want to come participate in those things in person. That's the approach that I think we'll be moving towards.
Well, and you both kind of started to answer the next question, but I feel like sometimes keeping people engaged when you're never physically together, because there are some things that are lost from that. So can you talk about some of the programs that you both have put in place to really help that engagement? Or I know like in the May, you brought a ton of Cardinal people to the InfoSec Summit, and then you guys did a small gathering. And I think that was like wonderful, because half of these people that were hired had never met one another face to face. So can we talk a little bit about maybe some of the creative ways to encourage collaboration, teamwork, because it's a lot. I think it's a little more challenging when everyone's remote. Yeah,
I don't know how creative it is per se, but today, like, we continue to meet folks that we've worked with for a couple of years and have never physically met. So to Connie's point, like, one of the things we've tried to do is where we have a group of people that are going together for a particular training conference, like, we spend a few days, getting them together and doing some other team building activities, right? Leveraging those investments we're already making to bring those folks together, and it's been hugely beneficial for those team members to kind of build that chemistry there. We leverage tools like Teams and Zoom and things like that just to make sure we're staying connected and create communities to bring people together. And it's not just a, hey, I need something from you, but like, how do we keep that dialogue going throughout the course of the day so that people can hop in and hop out, contribute to the overall goals of the organization, and ask a quick question and get some guidance on that. So kind of replicating that virtual water cooler, if you will, is something we try to do. Not easy though, for sure.
No.
Yeah, I think to the point of sort of when you can use the time to get together in person, that's great. But honestly, and again, not super creative, but I think it comes back to having a really strong collaboration tool set in your organization. We personally use Slack, and I think I have a love-hate relationship with Slack, so it's constantly on, but it is, I will say that I've been in organizations that haven't had that kind of collaboration tool, and it really makes the collaboration feel more personal in ways, because there's a lot of flexibility in the tool set, emojis and things like that you just don't get to use on your normal work collaboration, or like an email. So I think that some of those really do contribute to a culture that supports remote work, is having effective collaboration tools in place. And then the second thing I would say is that we also sort of we use tools or fun things to try and get people to connect on a more personal level. So we'll do breakout rooms in our team meetings to have a little bit of a smaller group. We'll do things like random coffees, where you just get assigned to someone else in the organization outside of your team to just have a quick coffee and chat with virtually. And so I think some of those things that if you build it as part of the culture, people will participate, and it really does make a difference.
No, those are great. And I know, like, I've seen like some companies do like a DJ once a month. I know like in the beginning of COVID, there was a lot of like happy hours, but I think we all got burned out about those. I always say we have an alcohol problem in cybersecurity. Yeah. Well, I'm part of the Empower group, and we do a silent auction, and 90% of all of the stuff we did was alcohol, and it went for a ton of money. So I'm like, we have to do some I'm not a drinker, so I'm like, we have to do some that are not, but alcohol brings us a ton of money for our Empower group. So I don't know what that's saying about us, but it's all good. And then
like a you problem.
I know, right? Exactly. So, kind of thinking, I think sometimes some of the challenging is when you have a workforce that you have an older workforce and a newer workforce, and like some of us that have been in the industry and the workplace for a long time, sometimes it's a little more challenging for, I think, sometimes older people to kind of do the whole virtual thing because, we've all grown up inside an office. So have you seen any challenges around that, and and if you have, what kinds of things have you done to kind of, because generationally, I mean, people do things so differently, so how do you bridge that gap? I know that was a made-up question. I didn't have that on there, so you can still.
Totally fine. It's an interesting question. So I had a conversation the other day with the program coordinator of the high school program, and separately we were talking about soft skills for the workforce and how challenging it is to teach soft skills in a remote environment. And I thought, interesting, because I think soft skills in the workplace are sort of shifting and evolving. What does a soft skill look like now? It's effectively interacting in a remote Zoom meeting, right? Some of those things, I think, to kind of the point I said earlier, I think it is about having effective tools in place and the resources for the individuals to use those tools and feel comfortable with them, and really make sure that it's something that everyone has access to in a similar way. So certainly I think that we don't necessarily do any targeted efforts in that space, but I think that what we communicate across organization and how we present those tools really does sort of support acceptance across all different groups of people.
Yeah, I think being 100% virtual and being this way for the last couple of years has kind of put everybody on a level playing field when it comes to leveraging some of those technologies. And it's kind of interesting. You think back to pre-COVID. I mean, we had Zoom and those kinds of capabilities, and people would dial into meetings. Like, nobody would ever turn on their camera, right? So you could never see a face, how they're reacting to a particular conversation. And we've kind of normalized that, right? So everybody, when you get on Zoom, the first thing you do is turn on your camera, right? So at least that piece of it and those kind of unsaid signals, like you can see body language and kind of read people at least a little bit on Zoom. So that, I feel like that's kind of leveled the playing field a little bit over the last couple of years. But I think, with the younger generation in particular, I mean, they've grown up with their cell phones and computers and email and text and all that kind of stuff. And so one thing you constantly have to have the conversation is like, people can't always read intent in those kinds of communications too. And so like those soft skills are much more than just how do I verbally converse with somebody and talk about a particular issue or challenge. It's like in your written communication, how does that come through as well? So a lot of the conversations we have are around those kinds of things as well.
So are you guys doing anything, because I know Brian, you and I have talked about this many times, is like part of that training and development is soft skills. Because I feel like technology skills, I mean, if you're not technology savvy, it could be really challenging, but I think the soft skills are a lot harder because everyone communicates differently. So have you done any investment in soft skills, like just overall communications between people and being respectful and all of those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a pretty robust training program at Cardinal from an HR perspective. So some of those, opportunities already existed. And I mean, as we sit down and have conversations around development plans for individuals and things like that, I mean, that's where we identify those opportunities and make sure we're getting folks the training and coaching that they need.
Yeah, we do the same, and we offer those across all levels of the organization. So leaders have leader-specific focus trainings, and to your point, kind of identifying what would be the appropriate training for their career development and personal development and applying it appropriately.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, can you imagine like doing like a capture the flag or like a pen test, and part of that training is they actually have to deliver the technical details to the line manager, and then also report those to like the CISO, a director of CISO. Like, how many of you, I think that, I mean, I'm a communications person, so, I mean, how many people would be, one, comfortable if your manager asked you to deliver the results from a technical perspective and then from a business perspective? So let's go with the technical. How many would be comfortable with the technical side? So most people. What about from the business side? So it's about half. And so I just think, like, one of the things I think when we're looking at training and development, I think we need to take it beyond technology, because I personally think we're going to go more with security champions. And I know it's a buzzword, but I feel like it is a good definition, because finding talent is hard. And can you imagine if we taught all of our app developers how to write secure code? You probably aren't going to need as many app security people. And the same thing, because talent is, I mean, especially, I would say if we asked everyone in the room, we've probably all either worked at Bank One / Chase, Nationwide, Cardinal. Like, I feel like almost everyone's worked, or Ohio State. So like, how do we, think about those security champions and what that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about that. I mentioned that digital university that we have, I think, is a big part of that, as well as just getting folks from out in our IT organization and the business, quite honestly, like participating in those particular programs. One I kind of mentioned before is application security. Those, I mean, they're like unicorns trying to find those types of resources, right? And so the conversation we've been having is, how do we train our own folks, right? If we've got great developers out there and we teach them about security, can they become that security champion or potentially apply for a role within our team, right? So I think there's a couple different ways that we can leverage those, those particular folks, whether they're in information security or not.
Yeah, we're having the same discussions. I think that's certainly a hot topic, the security champions approach. And I think in the same way that we expect or ask that really talented information security professionals, part of the job is learning about the business. I think we are sort of seeing a similar value proposition when we say someone who's already in the business might be best positioned if they really understand risk management, or if they're in development already, application security, to apply those to that portion of the organization. And so we certainly think that there's value in that. I think that when you're in a resource-constrained environment, it's difficult to find the time. So that's being purposeful with leadership about identifying where those opportunities are and how we can facilitate that across the organization is really the key component to it.
The only thing I'd add to that, too, I agree with that 100%, is sometimes we get so internally focused on the things that we're doing from an information security perspective and trying to deal with all the threats that are coming at us on a daily basis. We don't necessarily understand the business context around that, too. And so that's something we talk a lot about within our team, is like, how do we get more business acumen for our folks out there, right? And learning about how our company makes money and what some of their critical processes are, right? Because I think that provides some better context for the findings and the things that they're dealing with on a daily basis, for sure.
And I think it's really smart, too, because, by show of hands, how many times as a security person you've gone to your leadership and say, we need to do this, and it couldn't happen? By show of hands. And I know it's more than one person. So, I mean, but that's so challenging, because many times when you think about, the business and security, technology and security are a part of every day in the business world, but money and business will always drive everything else. And I mean, I've seen this over the years where if you patch a machine, especially if you're talking about industrial controls or SCADA systems, if you patch something, you may not be able to recover it. And by the way, if you need to get parts, you're going to be going on eBay and buying them from China. And I don't know about you guys, but I probably wouldn't be comfortable plugging an industrial control system or SCADA system. So it's one of those things, sometimes we have to think about compensating controls and workarounds. And to me, that comes into those soft skills, because if you understand the impact to the business, then you don't get as angry. You still want them to do we want them to do what we want them to do, but unfortunately we can't always do that. Yeah. Have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think it kind of goes back to the question you'd asked about the types of talent we're recruiting, or where are we finding talent. And I think, for us, DE&I for sure is one of our key themes from a talent perspective, and we've got some programs we're implementing around that. But in addition to that, you've also got to think about diversity of thought on your team as well. And I think that's something that we talk about when we go and post a position and we look for candidates out there. Isn't always the traditional information security resource that you want to hire. We've had people on our team that have a background in HR or somebody that comes from a finance background, and if we want to do risk modeling, who better than to have somebody that understands finance and numbers and those kinds of things to help us put together those models. And we've had somebody on our team that was a professional online poker player, right? So not a traditional type of a background,
They probably
right?
understand risk really well.
Yeah, exactly,
Well, hopefully they
right?
do.
So I mean, having those different perspectives when you come together as a team and have a conversation are really important to to generate the best outcome for you.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything to add.
So what we're starting to see this in, a lot of CISOs have actually had me talk to their recruiters. I think how many times have we see job descriptions where it's an entry level and they're asking for a CISSP? That's not an entry level role. So have you really worked closely with your HR? Because I still see so many job descriptions. And I think when you look at women and minorities, in general, if we don't have 80% or more of the requirements, we will not even apply. Where men typically is 25 to 30 or more. So that's a huge gap. So when we do job descriptions, I think it's better to say what we absolutely need versus, and then maybe some likes that we potentially would like them to have. But also I like what you were saying, let's say I don't care, let's name your technology. If you understand how firewalls work or you understand how a SOC works, you may have different tools, but the methodologies are relatively similar. So have you changed some of your job descriptions so they're not so specific? Because again, that's those specifics. And then obviously if you want a unicorn and you're offering entry-level pay, that doesn't work either. So what have you guys done with your HR teams to kind of maybe look at that and change those up a little bit?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work around this and really focus heavily on doing a skills-based job posting, which is where it kind of starts. You can't do skills-based interviewing and hiring if you're not putting out a skills-based job post. So really making those removing the things that are, I'm looking for a very specific experience level or years of experience or qualification. Sometimes you can't get around that. You might need it. There may be a case for putting some of those things in. But for the most part, we have found that by removing those, we've gotten more diverse hiring pools and applicant pools, and then been able to focus our actual interviews to be skills-based interviews and allow us to assess those more effectively without having those interviewers focus on, did they check this box from a, if it's a degree or a certification or years of experience, but really looking at the value and the skill set that's being brought.
Yeah, I don't know that I've got much more to add to that. I think, for us, it's been more about these are minimum required things you need to have versus these are the types of skills we're looking for, right? Kind of more guidelines than anything on that, or examples of the type of technology, right? So not being very particular or specific about it, but more just kind of in the general area of what we're looking for.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, we went through a lot of questions, so now we'd like to open it up to the audience. If you would like to ask a question, if you could wait for the microphone so the virtual people can hear as well. So does anyone have any questions, or did we do such a great job there's no questions? I'm just kidding.
My name's Rick. All of you are executives, right? Yeah. So I'm not, and these are great ideas, but when you talk about these great ideas, do you have any tips for those of us who are not executives when we want to pitch it up the chain, especially resources for doing conferencing and things like that, for facilitating remote work and such? COVID kind of pushed it a lot, but sometimes I had an interview with a company in Tennessee this week, and for all the right reasons, they have this community and they want people on site. It makes kind of sense, but they shut out people who would work remotely. And how do you pitch to their CEO, hey, you should let some people work from home?
I know, right?
I think some of it comes down to company culture. And so that's really, it can be difficult to shift that. But the way, I think, providing that guidance and insight to the value that comes from those things. So if we're pitching remote work and we are having challenges in DE&I recruiting or having diversity in the workforce or hiring applicant pools, then understanding the value that you can bring and the problem that you can kind of solve by providing that context or that approach, I think is how I would go about having the conversation at least.
Yeah, I mean, I know when COVID first started, our executive leadership team was very keen on getting people back in the office, and I think we kind of pushed the ball from an information security perspective and say it's not a realistic model for us to be operating in, right? Like the supply and demand of resources out there, they've got a lot of choices, right? And if we want to get the best talent, we have to be open to thinking differently and operating differently, and I think they understood that. And we're very supportive of the model we chose to move forward with. So,
and if I was in your shoes, were you working with a recruiter or like an internal recruiter for the interview? It was internal. Okay, so I would, if it was me, I would basically have a conversation and almost help them build a business case that they could take back to their leadership. It may or may not make a difference, but I know many times people reach out to me and they're expecting, people to be in the office 3 days a week. And there are several companies in Columbus that are requiring at least 2 to 3 days and doing looking at badges to make sure you're going in. So I think just having that conversation and almost building an ROI, being able to expand talent, having a lot more choices, because again, Columbus is growing, and with Intel and all these other companies, it's not going to get any better. So if we can only have talent in Columbus, it's going to be really challenging.
Well, I think you kind of talked about building that business case for it too, right? Like there's a lot of data and metrics that we collect as information security professionals. Productivity is certainly one of those things too, right? If you talk about whether productivity stays the same, improves, gets worse, I think that kind of helps, assuming that it stays at the same or better, I think you've got a pretty good argument, right, for remote working being the way to go, so.
I think, oh God. Jay, did you have a question? I think I saw your hand. Well, okay, sorry.
Good afternoon, my name's Buzz. You mentioned culture, and that's a great piece, and everything's been talked about, culture eats everything, culture is a success to every company. Have you seen an impact to your culture, positive or negative, since you've gone 100% remote? And if it's negative, what steps are you taking to try and boost back that culture?
That's a great question. The interesting thing for us at Cardinal is we've had a tremendous amount of growth during that COVID phase, right? So we've had some pretty healthy investments in information security over the last couple of years, and it's kind of coincided with us having to hire all these folks in a remote environment. So we've kind of had to build a lot of that culture remotely, right? So I don't know that I could comment on is it better or worse than it was 2.5 years ago. I just know this is the culture we have now, right? And I think one of the things we are trying to push is how do we get folks together on a periodic basis just to make sure we don't lose that human touch point. We're able to focus on building relationships, because at the end of the day, if we build those relationships, we understand people on a personal level, it helps build trust and it helps us move faster as an organization, right? And so that, for us, that's probably the main thing we try to do is with those get-togethers.
Yeah, I would say the tenets of our culture have not shifted. They're the same. We're driving towards the same objectives. I think the ways in which we achieve those have shifted. Certainly, there have been ebbs and flows, and we'll have to adjust if we see that a portion of our culture is negatively impacted or shifting in a way that we don't want it to go in the future. Then we're addressing that as we see it. So we're really trying to be proactively planning for what we want it to be, but then reactive and understanding, monitoring how it's continuing to progress and being reactive and taking action when we see that shift.
Good afternoon. My name is Ty. My question is, you both brought up you're looking for particular skills when you're looking to hire people, not necessarily check boxes. But what are those top 3 or 5 skills or competencies that you're interviewing for that tell you this is a great candidate to be part of your IT or information security team?
Yeah, that's another great question here. I would say for us, I think first is a culture fit, right? So we've kind of talked about that. I think that's something we've got a pretty well-defined culture at Cardinal, and we certainly ask a lot of questions to understand how would this person fit in with our team and mesh, right? I think that's first and foremost there. As far as skills go, I'd say being a problem solver, right? Like somebody that's demonstrated an ability to kind of flex into different roles and be successful in them, I think is very important for us, right? Because we all know that no 2 days are the same in our industry here. And I would say communication is another one too, right? We talked before about being able to flex and kind of have a discussion with the technical team about something you need done, but also putting something in business terms so that folks understand the nature of the risk that they're taking on and accepting, or if they want us to remediate or mitigate those particular risks, right? You've got to be able to put that in business terms. So I would say those are probably a couple things that that are important for us.
Yeah, I think would absolutely agree with those. I would also say the technical skills more aligned to the job requirements, right? Whatever that role is. But generally across the board, some of the skill sets that I would add to that one would be an ownership mentality, demonstrating that you're willing to take ownership and move the ball forward without, being told. And then I would also say that approach to being willing to challenge the norm and seeing that you're willing to voice your opinion and be creative and thoughtful in those ideas, but then also bring them to the table in a way that can be digested by the group. And that's not like, there's soft skills to that as well. So those are the 2 that I would add to that.
And I like that, like being a self-starter, because if you think about, if we had 10,000 people in a building and now there are 10,000 people all over, you're managing like 10,000 businesses to some degree because, everything is not within the containment. And I think being a self-starter, because if we want the luxury of working from home, we have to be accountable to ourselves and to our business. And that, I think, is probably the biggest challenge when you don't have someone that's that way. How do you instill that in them? And obviously that's going to be coaching and mentoring, but I think if we have all really good individual contributors, then the end result's always going to be better. So, Jay, I think you are next. Oops, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Jay, I thought I saw the microphone in your hand.
Yeah, okay.
We'll get to one of these days.
I'll toss it back. My bad.
Okay.
Happen to be in the same direction. I'm Sean Anthony. Thank you guys for coming. I understand the sore throat problem. I tore something in mine, so that was great. But in the decade that COVID started 2.5 years ago, what has been some training? Because training in security has, in a positive spin, has been accelerated by the work from home and everyone finally being forced to take security seriously, the same way that credit cards were forced to be made more secure because Target decided to goof up. What is some advice or good planning for making training both fun and memorable and something that people can actually participate in rather than just clicking next?
I think first it's know your audience. Do training that is relevant and valuable to the audience because no one's going to engage or pay attention if it's not. And then we use some training that I think is, you might look at it and say that's super corny and like no one's going to remember that. And then a week later, the whole office is talking about it because there's like a fun aspect to it. So I think have some of the production value that, like put some effort into finding things that can be informative and fun and also engaging for those individuals. And it's not always the like obvious, this is just the best training of my life, but like that was a really ridiculous way to tell me not to throw personal information in the trash can, right? So I think that those are some of the things I would just mention.
Yeah, great call out there. And I think the other piece of that too that you kind of hit on is just the personalized training. One of the things that we do is, with our executive leadership team, we go and, attend their staff meetings on a quarterly basis, and we talk about what's in the news and, give them an opportunity to ask a lot of questions about it. But we also try and put it in terms of what does that risk mean to them, right? And so that education, I think, is certainly helpful for those folks. And then reinforce, like phishing is a big piece of that conversation, right? We talk about their phishing test results, which, I can throw a chart and some data in front of them, but talking about what are the impacts of, like, if that were a real email, what would that do to your business, right? And so I think just kind of personalizing that for them, helps them understand a little bit better, but then, helps generate support for their entire team, right? And reinforcing that message for us. So those are a couple things that we do.
And I agree, I think you need to meet people where they are. I think people learn differently. So I personally like blended learning solutions. So there's opportunity for individuals to excel beyond a classroom style, but some people learn better in a classroom. Some people learn best self-study. And so I think understanding your team and pulling together programs that make sense around that, because I'm one of these people, if you ask me to sit and read a book, I'd rather poke my eyes out with a fork. Because I have no attention span, I'm going a million miles in it, but if I sit in a classroom and someone shows expertise, I'm a sponge. I just can pick it up. So I know that about myself, and I think as leaders, we have to understand where people are and build programs that really meet people, honestly, where their best learning experiences and where they can excel.
We should have thrown that question to you first.
Yeah, I know. That's okay. Jay, now it's finally you.
All right, let's do this. I just want to say thanks for the event. So I'm Jay Bobo with Cover My Meds. I had a question about just kind of reinventing work, which we've kind of talked a little bit about here and thinking differently. During the Great Recession, we had, actually underneath Shalane, who's in here, we had a lot of success with the program, really developing an alumni network, which we were able to go through and hire about 40% of those folks from the alumni network back into the company. These are all senior engineers. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of ways in which you all may have thought about alumni networks or other ways in which you can sort of reinvent work to retain people, to rehire them back into the company, maybe even have them do contracting on the side. Can you talk maybe about some different ways that maybe you kept people during the Great Recession, or how you're finding ways to bring in great talent now?
Well, I think certainly social media presence is a key part of that too. And it's not necessarily hey, do we have a Cardinal Information Security Twitter account and we're putting stuff out there, but I think just having people attend sessions like these and network is an important part of it. Being active on LinkedIn and talking about some of the great things going on, participating in our healthcare ISAC, right, and being part of those types of things have certainly helped us, try and build our brand as a company and about what our information security team is about. So I think that's an important part of it too. And we've seen some great talent come into the organization just by having those connections out there. So I don't know that it's anything kind of earth-shattering per se, but that definitely has been part of the the work over the last 1 or 2 years here.
Yeah, and I would probably say very much a similar thing. I think having a well-defined culture and company mission that people know and recognize, and as we have alumni from our organization out in industry, making sure that we're staying connected with them and keeping those relationships strong is really important to the organization. So we haven't necessarily shifted. I think you asked about different kinds of work engagements. We haven't really shifted too much to contract style or part-time or anything like that. But I think we are very focused on making sure that we have a culture that can support a diverse set of needs.
One other thing I wanted to add too. So, we talked about the fact that, we're 100% remote, right? A lot of our companies have kind of moved that way as well. Before, we were recruiting from within the 270 loop, right? So the only people that knew about Cardinal were the folks here in Columbus, versus now we've got, a pocket of folks down in Dallas, some in DC, some in Florida, right? So, the fact that those folks have an opportunity to get out in their local community and talk about what they're doing and talk about our company has helped expand that network too. So, something to think about with your own companies.
And I just think overall culture is going to be different in every organization. And I think as we're hiring or you're accepting jobs, is understanding culture and making sure it's a good fit. I mean, we all have heard the whole saying, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And I think there's a big difference between managers and leaders. And I think with the way the cybersecurity industry is, we really need strong leaders. And having that pulse. And I know, Jay, you and I have had this conversation where at Cover My Meds, you guys have a ton of flexibility in hours. And I'm on the same mindset. Like, I don't need someone necessarily sitting in front of a computer 8 to 5. If they work better in the evening and their job allows that to happen, and it's not going to be critical to the business, let people meet people where they are. And as long as people are being accountable for what they're doing, I think having that flexibility. Now, there are some organizations, depending on what you do, you just can't do that. So I think it just really is about finding that culture and understanding. And I always tell people the 2 best things you can do for your career, whether you stay where you're going or going somewhere else, is networking and public speaking. Because how many times have you heard someone do an amazing speaking? I know at our summit last year, there's someone in here, they were like, come work for me. You know what I mean? Because they were just such an expert. So leveraging that networking aspect. And I think we are extremely fortunate in Columbus, Ohio. I've sold all over the globe, and I've never seen a community what we have here. And I think we need to leverage that and learn from each other. And even getting different companies together and talking about what's working culturally. Again, there's not a perfect square to fit into a square box. I mean, we got to be a little more creative, but sharing is super important for the success of any organization. And again, there's the ISACs, but there's a lot of sharing. I know Ohio State has gone to Cardinal and nationwide. Just doing things like that, I think, are important.
Hi, my name is Shalane, and I want to touch on what you were speaking of earlier about working with high schools and getting more interest at a younger level, but also there is a lack of entry-level roles where people can actually gain the experience that they need to grow their careers. So what is being done in your organizations, or what ideas do you have for bringing in more entry-level talent for people to get the skills that they need to grow in cybersecurity or information security?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that we're doing sort of internships, which I think is a lower risk way for an organization to engage in providing some of these skill sets and experience to individuals that are earlier on in their career. So I think, and it's great for the individual who can try this out and see if it's something that they like too. So we certainly have been doing everything we can to try and participate in those programs and make sure that there are those opportunities. I will say we are a smaller team. It's very challenging to support and give entry-level individuals the support that they need to be effective and to grow when you're a smaller team. So I think some of those are just organization by organization. It's being purposeful about your plans, and not even just those entry-level roles, but the roles within the entire team that can support them, because they do require support, and they do require education and learning and ongoing effort. And so I think that those 2 approaches are kind of how we're tackling it right now, but it certainly is something that as a smaller company we do struggle with, because there's not enough resources to train new individuals. And so certainly we take that into account, because I don't want to bring someone on and then have them not feel supported and have a bad experience. And I think that would be worse than not doing it.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we certainly have internship programs that we leverage as well. We've also had some leadership development programs that have been in place. They're kind of undergoing a little bit of a facelift right now, but that was a way for us to bring students off of campus into the IT organization and do rotations, right? So maybe they spend a year in the PMO, a year in development role, and then a year in information security. So it helps build them and kind of get them a little bit more well-rounded. We've had a lot of those folks, fortunately, stay within information security. They love that rotation, and we've been fortunate to keep them in those roles. So we've tried to be purposeful about keeping some of those roles open so we can rotate talent into that. But certainly when you think about areas like incident response and that kind of stuff, like operations, we've outsourced some of that stuff, right? We have a partner that we work with, so it's a little bit more difficult to find and keep some of those entry-level roles in there. But certainly the talent pipeline, I think, is one of the things that we're trying to get focused on, getting involved with some of the local school districts and things like that, particularly when you think about DE&I efforts around that too. I mean, we're kind of limited with the pool that we have, so how do we create a bigger pool of candidates to put into those roles? One of our goals over the next several years at Cardinal is increased representation at the manager and up level. So a manager could be a people manager or it could be a technical lead. And so part of that challenge is a lot of those folks that'll be in those roles 8 years from now are sitting in high schools or on college campuses right now. And we've got to get folks energized about this particular industry and interested in that. And so that's why we're trying to start with the local school districts and kind of encouraging folks to enter into that industry.
And just, God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, that's what I'm saying. We've got to be intentional about what those roles are, and it's not just in one particular part of our organization. As we mentioned before, there's a lot of different disciplines within information security, and we need to encourage folks to understand, like, hey, there's a lot of different ways you can go with that. We need to make sure we've got those entry-level roles available across all of those disciplines too.
And this is just something to throw out if anyone has any ideas. I know with us working with schools, a lot of the high schools, part of their programs is they need to have internships, but these kids are not 18 years old. And from a legal perspective, from cyber insurance, what happens if they overhear about this big breach? They go home and tell their parents, and their parents tell their friends, because that's going to happen. So we are really trying to figure out a way in Ohio, and then we want to spread this to other states of how can we get more engagement. And I think it's a little more challenging with 100% remote. Just sitting someone in front of a computer that doesn't really have those skill sets, it's going to be challenging. So we're really trying to figure out what types of programs they can have. I mean, in Ohio, like I said, I'm part of Empower, so any woman in the Midwest, we have scholarship funds. ISSA, we actually just started a scholarship fund this May, and I think we have about $35,000 in that. So we really want to start talking to high school and college students because as we get more mature, most of us can sometimes financially afford stuff. So how can we kind of build all of this whole community around, supporting different groups and having more diverse groups, and definitely want to get involved more in the inner city schools because right now it's like Southwestern, Dublin. I'm actually talking to New Albany this week, and then I know Ohio State wants to get involved. So there's a lot of conversations amongst all the larger companies of what we can do, because it is hard when you only have a small team. Because I mean, by show of hands, is anyone fully staffed and have enough people in cybersecurity? So that's the problem. I remember 10 years ago and say we need to start training and development, and we really didn't do it, and now we continue to go to critical mass of not being able to find talent. And then a lot of your colleges, it's so theory-based. I think you have to do research. So when I talk to mentoring students, I'm like, you don't necessarily need a degree, but I know Scott is over here. He really built Tiffin University, and I am on their advisory board, but he did an amazing job. He took really theory into practice. And so I think it's all of our responsibilities when you are involved with, if you have kids and you can get involved and talk to leaders in schools, because still to this day, a lot of colleges tell girls to be either a nurse or a teacher. And though there's nothing wrong with those professions, I couldn't do either one of those, but to me, that messaging has to change because everything has a technology flair to it. And so I think a lot of the younger people, they can learn these skills pretty quickly because they have a sound technology background. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but any other questions?
We have a virtual question.
Yeah.
From Mark. Question is, do you truly believe colleges, universities are preparing students for real-world cybersecurity? For example, red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, and incident response, disaster recovery, vulnerability management, third-party risk management, control effectiveness, control execution,
Pretty much
et
all
cetera,
the
et
domains
cetera.
within cybersecurity.
That's a long one.
The answer is no.
Yeah. Well, and I honestly think it depends because like Franklin, Columbus State, Tiffin University, all in Ohio, what I have found working with them is they've taken theory into practice. And so they bring in other things. But honestly, when you have someone that's been a professor their entire life and has never worked in a corporate environment, it's hard to take theory into practice. And I also, like when I talk to high school students, the first thing I say is do not go home to your parents and tell them I did not tell you to go to college because they're going to like freak out. But I think we all can admit like some of the most talented pen testers that I know barely graduated from high school, not because they were dumb, they were bored. And so I think it's one of those things, and I always talk about security being a journey, not a destination. And with that, like if you're not a constant learner, I just don't think security or IT is where you should be, because I've been doing this for 18 years and then IT with that 25, and I can't even fathom all the changes that have happened in the last 25 years. So just something to think about.
Yeah, I would also, maybe unpopular opinion, I don't know that I would say going to a university and getting a bachelor's degree is intended to give you all those skill sets.
Yeah.
Like you should certainly learn foundations. You should understand these at a foundational level, be able to problem solve. You're almost learning how to learn and be a continual learner. And then I think you get the experience through work-based learning or volunteering, and you get that like little bit of experience that you need to get you far enough that you can understand how to start applying these things and really move into sort of that entry-level job where you're going to learn. I'll be like dating myself, but when I went to college, there weren't cybersecurity degrees, and we didn't expect any of the people who started in the cybersecurity field to really come out of college knowing how to do pen testing and disaster recovery. We taught them how to do it, and that was based on a foundation and knowledge of what they learned in their field and in their degree. But I think we shouldn't expect to come right out of school and say I'm an expert in this area and this is what I'm going to go do, and be completely prepared for the working environment.
I don't think I have anything else to add to that. You hit it.
Okay.
That last question you asked sounded like a question to the room, so I'm going to answer it. This is Bob.
Oh.
About training the youth, and the Air Force has a Cyber Patriot program that's active through the high schools. But also, if you're going to train the youth, the big challenge is that you need to start with an ethical foundation. Otherwise, you're going to be creating a lot of script kiddies. And we have existing organizations like the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, or Scouting that start with an ethical. They take an oath before they even join. Mm-hmm. So that is an excellent spot to start. The Girl Scouts have a cybersecurity patch that they developed with the private sector. Boy Scouts still have not yet. I've on them all the time about this, but another topic. So answer is in our youth, but start with an ethical, and maybe talk to your local BSA or scouting organizations to create this. Possibly it's something our organization can create and hand to them as a training program. But ethical, where do you start with that? Maybe you can talk to that point.
And I think ethics should be one of the first things people learn obviously, because if you do bad things can happen, especially in security. The other thing that just personally drives me crazy, all of the programs that everyone's pushing, they're all pen testers. My problem with that is when you look at the whole scheme of cybersecurity, how many pen testers do you have at Cardinal as a Fortune 50?
We have a handful.
Yeah. How many do
Not
you
less
have?
than a handful.
So the problem is we're talking very small niche, and I'm like, in my personal opinion, if any company would hire a pen tester that has no experience, they're crazy, because it's too dangerous for that person and for the company. So I wish, that's one of the things is driving me insane right now, is it's all pen testing because it's sexy and everybody wants to do it. And when I go to Dublin, I'm like, why did you choose cybersecurity? They're all like, because I can make $100,000 starting. And I'm like, you're not going to make $100,000 as a 18-year-old high school kid. You can get there. But that's one of the things that I'm really trying to push the industry is like, let's start thinking differently, because, I mean, you need just as many GRC people, and you need, threat intel, third-party risk. I mean, the list goes on. And I sometimes think on the GRC side, it's a little easier if someone has those analytical skills. I mean, there's probably, Amy, I'm going to pick on you, she probably can read and memorize every regulations out there, but most people can't do that. And so how do? We research, we read, so you're learning on the job as you're going. And so I'm hoping we'll start to see some changes there, because again, these students thinking they're going to get pen test jobs with no experience is not going to happen. I mean, it can, but it's not very likely.
Right.
Hopefully this was useful, so.
And I think that's it.